Long Island Serial Killer, the untold story behind Gilgo Beach. Viewer discretion is advised. 22 is a true crime podcast that delves into real-life crime stories, which often involve graphic descriptions, sensitive content, and strong language that may not be suitable for all audiences. We strive to present these cases with the utmost respect for the victims and their families. Please note that the content discussed may be distressing or triggering for some listeners. Additionally, all resources and information presented in this podcast are obtained from publicly available internet sources. Listener discretion is strongly advised, and we recommend that only mature audiences proceed with caution. If you are sensitive to such content, please consider watching another video. Stay safe and take care of your mental health. Welcome back to 22 Crime, where we delve into some of the most chilling and complex cases in modern criminal history. And today, we embark on a journey into one of the most haunting mysteries of the 21st century, a case that has captivated and terrified people across the world for over a decade. This is the story of the Long Island serial killer. Our story begins in December 2010, when a routine search for a missing woman, Shannan Gilbert, led police to a shocking discovery along the desolate stretch of Gilgo Beach in Long Island, New York. What started as a single search quickly spiraled into one of the largest and most complex serial murder investigations in American history. As the investigation unfolded, the remains of multiple women were unearthed, each carefully wrapped in burlap and discarded along the quiet, windswept shores of Long Island. The chilling discovery of these bodies, initially known as the Gilgo Four, would set the stage for a relentless hunt for a killer who had eluded capture for years, leaving behind a trail of devastation and unanswered questions. The Long Island serial killer, also known as the Gilgo Beach Killer, is believed to be responsible for the deaths of at least 10 to 16 people over 2 decades, predominantly targeting women who were vulnerable and marginalized. These victims, many of whom were involved in the sex trade, shared a common thread of desperation and hope, a hope that would be cruelly and violently extinguished by a predator who thrived on their vulnerabilities. But who was this elusive killer? And why did it take so long to uncover the truth? As we peel back the layers of this case, we will explore the lives of the victims, the methods of the killer, and the staggering complexity of the investigation that has spanned more than a decade. In this episode, we'll introduce you to the central figures of this tragic story, women like Maureen Brainard-Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello, whose lives were tragically cut short. We'll also explore the broader scope of this investigation, including the discovery of additional victims and the dark secrets hidden within the marshes of Gilgo Beach. But this isn't just a story about a killer. It's a story about a community torn apart by fear, families shattered by grief, and a justice system that struggled to keep pace with a cunning and ruthless predator. To truly understand the magnitude of the Long Island serial killer case, we must first familiarize ourselves with the geographical context, Gilgo Beach, Oak Beach, and the surrounding areas. These quiet, unassuming locations, nestled along the southern coast of Long Island, New York, would become the eerie backdrop to one of the most harrowing murder investigations in modern history. Gilgo Beach is a long, narrow stretch of land on Jones Beach Island, part of Suffolk County, New York. This barrier island is flanked by the Great South Bay to the north and the vast Atlantic Ocean to the south. For decades, it has been a popular summer destination for beachgoers, with its pristine sands and relatively isolated shores offering an escape from the hustle and bustle of nearby New York City. Yet, despite its picturesque appearance, Gilgo Beach has an ominous side, a side that is deeply rooted in its geography. The area is characterized by dense, impenetrable marshlands, tall reeds swaying in the wind, and narrow, winding roads that seem to lead to nowhere. This is a place where the boundaries between civilization and wilderness blur, creating an environment both haunting and remote. To the west of Gilgo Beach lies Oak Beach, a small, gated community that feels almost forgotten by time. This secluded neighborhood consists of about 75 homes, many of them modest bungalows and cottages, perched precariously on the edge of the marshes. The residents of Oak Beach value their privacy, and for good reason. The isolation that provides them with a sense of peace also harbors secrets that would come to light in the most terrifying way imaginable. Oak Beach's isolation is both its charm and its curse. The single road in and out is often covered by water during high tide or heavy rain, cutting off the community from the outside world. This physical separation from the rest of Long Island made it an ideal location for those seeking solitude. But it also made it a prime spot for someone with sinister intentions, someone who knew that the marshlands could easily swallow evidence, that the winds would carry away any cries for help. The story of the Long Island serial killer truly begins not with the discovery of the bodies, but with the disappearance of one young woman, Shannan Gilbert. Shannan was a 24-year-old aspiring actress and singer who, like many others, had turned to sex work as a means of supporting herself. On the night of May 1, 2010, she was driven to a client's home in Oak Beach by her driver, Michael Pack. That client was a man named Joseph Brewer. What happened next is still shrouded in mystery. According to reports, Shannan spent approximately 2 hours at Brewer's home before something went terribly wrong. At 4:51 a.m., Shannan made a frantic 911 call, screaming that they were trying to kill her. The details of this call have been the subject of much debate, with some suggesting that Shannan was disoriented or under the influence, while others believe she was genuinely fleeing for her life. Shannan was seen running through the quiet streets of Oak Beach, knocking on doors, pleading for help. At one point, she encountered a resident named Gus Coletti, who tried to assist her, but she fled again into the darkness. This was the last time Shannan Gilbert was seen alive. Her disappearance would trigger a series of events that would forever change the quiet, sleepy community of Oak Beach. When Shannan failed to return home, her family reported her missing, and an extensive search was launched. This search, which began as a routine investigation into a missing person, would soon take a dark and unexpected turn. In December 2010, 7 months after Shannan disappeared, police conducting a training exercise with a cadaver dog stumbled upon human remains near Gilgo Beach. What they found would shock the nation. As investigators combed through the dense brush and sand, they uncovered not just one body, but four women who had been brutally murdered and discarded like trash along the desolate shoreline. These 4 women would come to be known as the Gilgo Four. They were identified as Maureen Brainard-Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. Each of these women had been living on the fringes of society, struggling with financial difficulties, and turning to sex work as a means of survival. And each had vanished under similar circumstances, lured by the promise of quick money, only to meet a violent and untimely death. The bodies were all found within a few miles of each other, carefully wrapped in burlap, a detail that suggested a methodical and organized killer. This discovery would mark the beginning of a long and arduous investigation, one that would eventually reveal even more victims and expose the depths of the horror that had been unfolding on Long Island for years. But the story of the Gilgo Four is just the beginning. As the investigation continued, the police would uncover additional remains, each new discovery adding another layer of complexity and terror to the case. The term Gilgo Four quickly became synonymous with the case, a chilling reminder of the lives lost and the dark secrets hidden beneath the surface of Long Island's serene beaches. But who were these women? What were their stories? And how did they end up as victims of one of the most elusive serial killers in history? As we continue to delve into this case, we will explore not only the lives of these women but also the broader scope of the investigation, the additional victims, the possible connections, and the sinister figure who may be responsible for it all. As we delve deeper into the dark world of the Long Island serial killer case, it is crucial to remember that at the heart of this investigation are the lives that were tragically cut short. These women, who came to be known as the Gilgo Four, were more than just victims. They were daughters, sisters, friends, each with their own story of struggle, resilience, and hope. In this section, we will explore the lives of Maureen Brainard-Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello, and examine the common threads that bind their fates together. Maureen Brainard-Barnes was a 25-year-old woman from Norwich, Connecticut, whose life was marked by a series of challenges that would ultimately lead her down a dangerous path. Maureen was described by those who knew her as a kind-hearted, determined woman who always put her family first. She was the eldest of 3 children, taking on a maternal role after her father passed away when she was just 21 years old. This loss was a significant turning point in Maureen's life, leaving her with a heavy burden of responsibility. From an early age, Maureen dreamed of making something more of her life. Despite dropping out of high school after becoming pregnant with her first child at 16, she never gave up on her aspirations. She worked various jobs to make ends meet, from fast food restaurants to telemarketing, but nothing seemed to provide the financial stability she desperately needed. When she discovered ModelMayhem.com, a website that promised to connect aspiring models with job opportunities, Maureen saw it as a potential way out, a means to achieve her dreams. However, what started as an innocent pursuit of modeling quickly spiraled into something far more dangerous. Maureen was lured into the world of nude modeling and escorting, enticed by the promise of quick money. With 2 young children to care for, she felt she had no other choice. The work was grueling, but it offered a sense of financial independence that she had never known before, yet this independence came at a high cost. In July 2007, Maureen traveled to New York City to meet with a client, a trip that would mark her final journey. She was last seen at the Super 8 Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. Her final phone call to her sister Missy was filled with tension. Maureen was at Penn Station, scared and desperate to get home, but she didn't have enough money for a ticket. Missy offered to help, but Maureen vanished before she could return home. Her disappearance would remain a mystery for 3 long years until her remains were discovered near Gilgo Beach in December 2010. Maureen's story is one of struggle and resilience. She fought to provide for her children, even when the odds were stacked against her. But the very means by which she sought to escape her hardships ultimately led to her untimely death. Melissa Barthelemy was a vivacious 24-year-old from Buffalo, New York, with dreams of building a better life for herself and her family. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood, Melissa faced challenges from a young age. Her mother, Lynn, had been just 16 when she became pregnant with Melissa, and the family struggled to make ends meet. Despite these hardships, Melissa was determined to succeed. Melissa had always been fascinated by the world of beauty and fashion. She enrolled in beauty school after high school, mastering the art of hairstyling with a focus and determination that surprised even her mother. After graduating, Melissa moved to New York City, where she believed her skills could lead to a promising career. But the reality of life in the city was far harsher than she had imagined. Unable to find work that paid enough to cover her expenses, Melissa turned to escorting. Using the alias Chloe, she advertised her services on Craigslist, hoping to make enough money to eventually open her own salon. But the dangers of this lifestyle were ever present, and Melissa soon found herself entangled with a dangerous man named Blaze, who acted as her pimp. On the night of July 12, 2009, Melissa was last seen sitting on the curb outside her apartment in the Bronx. She had just completed a date and was $1,000 richer, but something went terribly wrong. The following day, when Melissa failed to return calls and texts, her family knew something was wrong. Then a series of chilling phone calls began. A man using Melissa's phone contacted her younger sister, Amanda, taunting her with details about Melissa's death. The calls were brief, but they were enough to terrify the family and provide a disturbing glimpse into the mind of the killer. Melissa's body was discovered in December 2010 alongside Maureen Brainard-Barnes, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. The discovery of her remains confirmed the family's worst fears, but it also raised more questions than answers. Melissa's life was one of ambition and drive, but also of vulnerability. She sought to carve out a better life for herself, but in doing so, she fell victim to a predator who preyed on her hopes and fears. Megan Waterman was a 22-year-old mother from Scarborough, Maine, whose life was marked by a series of tumultuous relationships and struggles with poverty. Growing up in a challenging environment, Megan had a difficult childhood. She was raised by her grandmother Muriel after her mother, Lorraine, lost custody due to her struggles with addiction and instability. Despite these early hardships, Megan was determined to provide a better life for her daughter, Liliana. Megan was described by those who knew her as fiercely independent and strong-willed. She enrolled in beauty school, hoping to create a stable future for herself and her daughter. However, the pressures of single motherhood and financial instability weighed heavily on her. She began dating a man named Akeem Cruz, known on the streets as Vibe, who introduced her to the world of escorting. Vibe was charismatic and manipulative, and he quickly became a central figure in Megan's life, controlling her movements and her finances. In June 2010, Megan traveled to Long Island with Vibe, staying at the Holiday Inn Express in Hauppauge. On the night of June 5th, Megan left the hotel to meet a client, but she never returned. Her disappearance was a devastating blow to her family, particularly her grandmother, who had raised her and her daughter. The search for Megan was intense, but it wasn't until December 2010 that her remains were found near Gilgo Beach, confirming the family's worst fears. Megan's story is one of survival and resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity. She was a young mother trying to make the best of a difficult situation, but she became entangled in a world that ultimately led to her death. Megan's life was defined by her love for her daughter and her determination to create a better future. But in her pursuit of financial stability, she encountered dangers that would tragically cut her life short. Amber Lynn Costello was a 27-year-old woman from North Babylon, New York, whose life was marked by tragedy, addiction, and a desperate search for belonging. Born in Wilmington, North Carolina, Amber grew up in a tumultuous environment. Her childhood was marred by the trauma of sexual abuse, which led her down a path of substance abuse and self-destruction. Amber was a petite woman with a bubbly personality, known for her quick wit and infectious laughter. But beneath the surface, she struggled with deep emotional pain. Her relationship with her family was complicated. She was close to her sister Kim, but their bond was strained by Amber's erratic behavior and drug use. In 2010, Amber moved to Long Island to live with her sister Kim and a man named Dave Schaller. Dave, a former MMA fighter with a troubled past, took Amber in, hoping to help her get back on her feet, but the environment they created was far from stable. Amber continued to struggle with addiction, and she turned to escorting as a means of supporting herself. Using the alias Carolina, she posted ads on Craigslist, but the work only deepened her addiction and despair. In early September 2010, Amber received a call from a man offering her $100 for a night. It was an unusually high offer, but Amber agreed, telling Dave she trusted the man. She left the house that evening, walking down the block to meet the client. This would be the last time anyone saw Amber alive. Her body was discovered near Gilgo Beach in December 2010, alongside the other victims. Amber's life was one of pain and struggle, but also of strength. She sought connection and belonging, but the dangers of her lifestyle ultimately led to her death. Amber's story is a poignant reminder of the vulnerabilities faced by women who find themselves on the margins of society. She was a woman searching for love and acceptance, but in the end, she fell victim to a predator who took advantage of her desperation. As we examine the lives of Maureen, Melissa, Megan, and Amber, we begin to see the common threads that bind their stories together. Each of these women came from challenging backgrounds, facing financial instability, troubled relationships, and the pressures of providing for themselves and their loved ones. They were all young, in their 20s, and they shared a common profession, escorting. It was this profession, born out of necessity for many of them, that made them vulnerable to a predator who would ultimately take their lives. But the connections between these women go beyond their backgrounds and profession. There is also the chilling detail of how their bodies were found. Each of the Gilgo Four was discovered wrapped in burlap, a detail that pointed to a single killer, someone who was methodical, organized, and deeply disturbed. The use of burlap was not just a practical means of concealment, it was a signature, a calling card that linked these murders together. The similarities in the circumstances of their disappearances also suggest a calculated approach by the killer. Each woman vanished after meeting with a client, often in situations where they felt secure enough to let their guard down. The killer exploited their vulnerabilities, luring them into a trap from which there was no escape. The discovery of the Gilgo Four marked the beginning of a much larger investigation, one that would eventually uncover more victims and reveal the terrifying scope of the Long Island serial killer's crimes. But for Maureen, Melissa, Megan, and Amber, Their stories remind us that these were not just faceless victims, they were real women with hopes, dreams, and lives that mattered. As the investigation into the Gilgo Beach murders continued, what began as a search for one missing woman, Shannan Gilbert, soon revealed a much more horrifying reality. The discovery of the Gilgo Four, Maureen Brainard-Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello, was just the beginning. As law enforcement expanded their search along Ocean Parkway, they uncovered more bodies, each adding another layer of complexity to the already chilling case. These additional victims would broaden the scope of the investigation and deepen the mystery surrounding the Long Island serial killer. Following the discovery of the Gilgo Four, police continued their search along Ocean Parkway, driven by the fear that more bodies might be hidden in the dense thicket of the Long Island coastline. Their fears were soon confirmed. Between March and April 2011, the remains of 6 more individuals were found, stretching the timeline of the killings and complicating the profile of the killer. These 6 victims, like the Gilgo Four, were found in close proximity to each other, but their cases presented unique and puzzling elements. The remains were not all complete. Some were partial, dismembered, and scattered, suggesting that the killer's methods may have evolved over time or that more than one perpetrator could be involved. The first of these additional victims was Jessica Taylor, a young woman whose partial remains had been discovered in 2003 in Manorville, nearly 45 miles away from Gilgo Beach. Her skull and other remains were found during the 2011 search, connecting her case directly to the Long Island serial killer. Jessica, like many of the other victims, was a sex worker, and her disappearance had gone largely unnoticed by the broader public. The discovery of her remains near Gilgo Beach underscored the fact that these crimes had been occurring for much longer than initially suspected. Next, the search revealed the remains of Valerie Mack, also known as Jane Doe No. 6. Like Jessica Taylor, Valerie's dismembered body had been partially found years earlier in Manorville, with the rest of her remains uncovered during the Gilgo Beach search. Valerie, who had also worked as an escort, had disappeared in 2000. Her case, like Jessica's, highlighted the transient and vulnerable lives of many of the victims, who often existed on the fringes of society. As the search continued, the remains of an unidentified woman, known only as Peaches, due to a distinctive tattoo of a peach on her body, were discovered. Peaches had been partially found in Hempstead Lake State Park in 1997, but it wasn't until 2011 that the rest of her remains were located near Gilgo Beach. In a heartbreaking twist, the remains of a young child were also found nearby. DNA testing later confirmed that the child was Peach's daughter, adding a layer of tragedy to the already grim discoveries. The killer had not only taken the life of a mother, but had also brutally ended the life of her child. Another victim, known as Jane Doe No. 3 or Cherry, was also found during this search. Like the others, she was dismembered, with parts of her body discovered in different locations. The connection between these victims, many of whom were found years after their initial disappearances, suggested a level of premeditation and brutality that shocked even seasoned investigators. Perhaps the most perplexing of all the victims found during this period was an unidentified Asian male, often referred to as John Doe. His remains were discovered near the others, but unlike the women, John Doe was found fully dressed in women's clothing. The police speculated that he might have been a transgender woman or someone involved in the sex trade, but his true identity remains unknown. The inclusion of a male victim in the list of the Long Island serial killer's known victims raised questions about the killer's motives and whether this was an anomaly or part of a broader, more complex pattern of targeting marginalized individuals. These discoveries marked a significant expansion of the investigation. What had initially been thought to be the work of a killer targeting women involved in the sex trade now appeared to be something even more sinister, involving multiple victims over many years, with a level of savagery that was truly unsettling. The diversity of the victims, both in terms of gender and the condition of their remains, suggested that the killer or killers had operated with a level of confidence and brutality that defied easy explanation. Among the many victims linked to the Long Island serial killer, one name stands out as a possible first victim: Sandra Costilla. Sandra was a young woman who, like many of the other victims, was involved in sex work and disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Her body was discovered years before the others, leading some investigators to speculate that she may have been the killer's first known victim. Sandra's case, while not initially connected to the Gilgo Beach murders, shares several key characteristics with the others, including the circumstances of her disappearance and the condition of her remains. Some experts believe that the similarities between her case and those of the Gilgo Four suggest a pattern of behavior that began with Sandra and continued with the other victims. If Sandra was indeed the first victim, her case represents the starting point of a series of brutal murders that would continue for years, leaving a trail of death and mystery that law enforcement is still trying to unravel. The possibility that the killer's reign of terror began with Sandra underscores the importance of re-examining cold cases and looking for connections that might have been missed in the initial investigations. As the investigation into the Long Island serial killer continued, the list of victims grew longer and the questions grew more pressing. With each new discovery, the complexity of the case deepened, and the true scope of the killer's crimes became more apparent. The additional victims found near Gilgo Beach, including Peaches, Baby Doe, the Asian male, and possibly Sandra Costilla, revealed a pattern of violence and cruelty that defied easy explanation. The challenge for investigators was not only to identify the victims and piece together their stories, but also to understand the mind of the killer, what drove them to target these individuals, and why the murders were carried out in such a brutal and methodical manner. The investigation had to consider whether these crimes were the work of a single individual or if there were multiple killers operating in the same area, each with their own twisted motivations. The story of the additional victims of the Long Island serial killer is a reminder of the many lives that have been lost, the families left behind to grieve, and the enduring mystery that surrounds these cases. As we continue to explore this dark chapter in true crime history, we honor the memories of the victims and remain committed to seeking justice for those who can no longer speak for themselves. Shannan Gilbert's story is often seen as the catalyst for the broader investigation into the Long Island serial killer, and it is a tale filled with fear, desperation, and unanswered questions. Born in 1986 in Ellenville, New York, Shannan was the eldest of 4 sisters in a family that faced numerous challenges. Her early life was marked by instability, including time spent in foster care, and she struggled with mental health issues, which only exacerbated the difficulties she faced as she grew older. Despite these challenges, Shannan was determined to build a better life for herself, and she had aspirations of becoming an actress, singer, or writer. However, like many women with limited opportunities, Shannan found herself working as an escort to make ends meet. On the night of April 30, 2010, Shannan, then 23 years old, was driven by her handler, Michael Pack, to the gated community of Oak Beach, Long Island. Shannan had been hired to meet a client, Joseph Brewer, through an escort service. Brewer, a local resident, was known in the area but was not considered a person of interest by the authorities until Shannan's disappearance. The events that transpired over the next few hours remain a point of contention and speculation. Shannan arrived at Brewer's house around 2 a.m. According to reports, Brewer later claimed that the encounter quickly soured when Shannan began acting erratically. Accounts vary as to what exactly happened, but it is known that around 4:51 a.m., Shannan made a frantic 23-minute 911 call. In the call, Shannan repeatedly told the dispatcher that someone was trying to kill her, though she did not specify who. The contents of the 911 call have been the subject of much debate, as it was not released to the public for several years, and even then, significant portions were redacted. However, what is clear is that Shannan was in a state of extreme panic and fear. After making the 911 call, Shannan fled Brewer's home, running through the quiet, dark streets of Oak Beach. She knocked on the doors of several nearby homes, desperately seeking help. 2 residents, Gus Coletti and Barbara Brennan, reported seeing Shannan in a state of distress. Coletti, who lived nearby, recalled how Shannan pounded on his door, pleading for help. He tried to assist her, but she fled again before he could do much more than offer a phone to call the police. She then ran past Brennan's house, who also reported seeing Shannan running down the street, appearing terrified. Brennan did not open her door but observed Shannan through a window as she disappeared into the night. At some point during her flight, Shannan encountered Michael Pack, who was searching for her in his vehicle. According to Pack, Shannan refused to get into the car, continuing her frantic dash through the neighborhood. This was the last confirmed sighting of Shannan Gilbert. For the next hour, Shannan's whereabouts were unknown. Despite her distress call, the Suffolk County Police Department did not immediately launch a search for her. It wasn't until hours later that an official search began, but by then, Shannan had vanished into the marshes near Oak Beach. Shannan's family, particularly her mother, Mari Gilbert, quickly became involved in the search for her. Mari was relentless in her pursuit of the truth, pressuring the authorities to take her daughter's disappearance seriously. Despite Mari's efforts, months passed with little progress. The case took an unexpected turn in December 2010 when the police, while searching for Shannan, discovered the remains of another woman along Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach. This discovery led to the unearthing of additional remains, ultimately revealing the presence of a serial killer operating in the area. However, Shannan was still missing. The search for Shannan continued sporadically over the next several months. Finally, on December 13, 2011, more than a year and a half after she disappeared, Shannan's skeletal remains were discovered in the marshland not far from where she was last seen. Her remains were found in a particularly dense and inaccessible part of the marsh, an area that had been overlooked in earlier searches. Along with her remains, police found Shannan's belongings, including her jeans, shoes, and a purse containing her identification, scattered around the marsh. The discovery of Shannan's remains raised more questions than it answered. The location of her body suggested that she had somehow made her way deep into the marsh, which was known to be treacherous and difficult to navigate, particularly at night. The condition of her remains made it impossible to determine an exact cause of death, but there was no obvious evidence of foul play, such as trauma to the bones. The official stance taken by the Suffolk County Police Department was that Shannan Gilbert's death was accidental. According to their theory, Shannan, disoriented and possibly under the influence of drugs, had wandered into the marsh and succumbed to the elements, either drowning in the waterlogged terrain or dying from exposure. This conclusion was met with significant skepticism from Shannan's family and from some within the public and media. One of the main points of contention was the nature of Shannan's 911 call. Those who heard the recording described her as being terrified and convinced that her life was in danger. Mari Gilbert and her attorney, John Ray, argued that the panic in Shannan's voice, coupled with her desperate attempts to find help, indicated that she was fleeing from someone rather than simply disoriented. They believed that Shannan may have been a victim of foul play, possibly by someone she encountered after leaving Brewer's house, or by Brewer himself. The police, however, were steadfast in their position that Shannan's death was not the result of a criminal act. They pointed to the lack of physical evidence of trauma and the location of her body as supporting their theory. But this explanation did little to satisfy Mari Gilbert, who continued to press for further investigation. One of the alternative theories that gained traction was that Shannan Gilbert was indeed a victim of the same killer, or killers, responsible for the other bodies found along Ocean Parkway. Supporters of this theory pointed out the proximity of Shannan's body to the other remains and argued that it was unlikely she had died independently of the other women. The fact that Shannan was working as an escort, like many of the other victims, further fueled speculation that she had fallen prey to the Long Island serial killer. However, there were also those who suggested that Shannan's case was different from the other murders. Some theorized that Shannan may have encountered a different predator entirely, or that her death was the result of a combination of unfortunate circumstances. The marshland where she was found was known for its difficult terrain, and it's possible that Shannan, in her panic, became trapped and unable to find her way out. Mari Gilbert became a central figure in the fight for justice for her daughter. Unwilling to accept the police's conclusion that Shannan's death was accidental, Mari tirelessly advocated for further investigation. She believed that the police had been too quick to dismiss Shannan's case, in part because of her work as an escort, and that they had failed to fully explore the possibility that she had been murdered. Mari's persistence led her to file a wrongful death lawsuit against Dr. Peter Hackett, a local resident who had become embroiled in the case after it was revealed that he had contacted Mari shortly after Shannan's disappearance. Hackett had initially denied making any contact with Mari, but phone records later confirmed that he had indeed called her. In the lawsuit, Maury alleged that Hackett had taken Shannan into his home, drugged her, and then either accidentally or deliberately caused her death. Hackett denied all accusations, and the lawsuit was ultimately dismissed, but the case brought renewed attention to the circumstances surrounding Shannan's death. Maury Gilbert's determination also had a broader impact on the investigation into the Long Island serial killer. Her refusal to accept the police's explanations kept the case in the public eye, and her advocacy on behalf of her daughter and the other victims highlighted the need for greater scrutiny of how such cases are handled, particularly when the victims are from vulnerable populations. In the years following Shannan's death, Maury became a spokesperson for the families of the other victims found along Ocean Parkway. She worked tirelessly to ensure that their stories were not forgotten and that the investigation remained active. Maury's efforts were instrumental in keeping the pressure on the authorities to continue searching for answers, even as the case grew colder. Tragically, Maury Gilbert's life was cut short in 2016 when she was murdered by her daughter Sarah, who suffered from severe mental illness. Maury's death was a heartbreaking end to a story already filled with so much sorrow, but her legacy as a fierce advocate for justice lives on. Her work helped bring attention to the often overlooked victims of violent crime and ensured that their voices were heard. Shannan Gilbert's story and Maury's fight for the truth remain central to the narrative of the Long Island serial killer case. The questions surrounding Shannan's death continue to be a source of debate and investigation, and her case serves as a stark reminder of the many lives impacted by the crimes committed along Gilgo Beach. As new developments emerge and the investigation continues, Shannan's story will undoubtedly remain a key part of the search for justice for all the victims. Rex Heuermann's name first entered the public sphere in connection with the infamous Gilgo Beach murders in 2023. Before that, he was largely an unknown figure, blending seamlessly into the fabric of suburban New York. However, the revelations about his life, career, and eventual connection to one of the most chilling serial murder cases in recent history have painted a portrait of a man who, for many years, lived a double life. Rex Heuermann was born in the early 1960s and grew up in Massapequa Park, Long Island, a quiet middle-class neighborhood not far from the areas where the bodies of several victims were eventually found. He was the product of a typical suburban upbringing, with no early indicators of the dark path he would later tread. Heuermann built a career as an architect and was the owner of a small firm in Midtown Manhattan known as RH Architecture. He was described by colleagues and clients as meticulous and professional, often working on high-end residential and commercial projects. Heuermann's work earned him a respectable reputation in the industry, and he appeared to live a stable and successful life. He was married and had 2 children, living in a modest home that belied the horror that would eventually be associated with his name. Despite his unassuming exterior, those who knew Heuermann described him as somewhat reclusive and intensely private. He was known to be intelligent and methodical, traits that served him well in his professional life, but would later be seen as key characteristics of a criminal mastermind. Rex Heuermann's personality traits, meticulousness, intelligence, and a capacity for compartmentalization are often seen in individuals who manage to lead double lives for extended periods. In Heuermann's case, these traits allowed him to maintain the facade of a normal, law-abiding citizen while allegedly committing heinous crimes in secret. Investigations into Heuermann's background revealed a man with no significant criminal history prior to his arrest in connection with the Gilgo Beach murders. This lack of a criminal record further contributed to his ability to evade suspicion for so long. However, those who have studied serial offenders know that many such individuals often operate undetected for years, precisely because they do not fit the typical profile of a criminal. Instead, they are often able to blend into society, maintaining jobs, families, and social ties that provide them with a veneer of normalcy. Heuermann's life also displayed other common traits of serial offenders, such as a need for control and power, a lack of empathy for others, and the ability to live a double life without arousing the suspicions of those closest to them. These traits likely played a significant role in his ability to commit multiple murders over an extended period without being caught. The investigation into Rex Heuermann began to gain traction in the early 2020s as advancements in technology, particularly in the field of forensic science, allowed investigators to re-examine old evidence with fresh eyes. For years, the Gilgo Beach case had frustrated law enforcement with numerous dead ends and false leads. However, the development of more sophisticated DNA analysis and the increasing use of digital forensics began to turn the tide. One of the key breakthroughs in identifying Heuermann as a suspect came from the reanalysis of cell phone records. Forensic experts were able to piece together a pattern of calls made from burner phones, which had been used to contact several of the victims. These phones, once thought to be untraceable, were now linked to a specific geographical area, the same area where Heuermann lived and worked. Further investigation into Heuermann's activities during the times when the murders took place revealed suspicious behavior, including unexplained absences and financial transactions that coincided with the dates of the murders. Investigators also noted that Heuermann had a vehicle that matched the description of one seen near the crime scenes. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered more damning evidence that linked Heuermann to the murders. DNA evidence, once considered inconclusive, was re-examined using the latest techniques, which allowed for a more precise identification of genetic material found on the victims. This evidence was crucial in placing Heuermann at the scene of the crimes. In addition to the DNA evidence, investigators also discovered physical evidence that tied Heuermann to the murders. Items found in his home and at his place of work matched materials used in the killings, including specific types of burlap used to wrap the bodies. These discoveries provided the concrete links needed to formally charge Heuermann with the murders. Another significant piece of evidence came from the detailed analysis of Heuermann's online activities. Investigators found that he had been frequenting websites and forums associated with the Gilgo Beach case, suggesting a morbid fascination with the investigation. His digital footprint also revealed searches related to the case and information on how to avoid detection by law enforcement, further implicating him in the crimes. One of the most disturbing aspects of the investigation into Rex Heuermann was the realization that his criminal activities likely spanned over a decade. The first known murders linked to the Gilgo Beach case occurred in the late 1990s, with the bodies of several victims being discovered in the early 2000s. However, it is believed that Heuermann may have been active long before these bodies were found, possibly as early as the 1980s. Heuermann's ability to evade capture for so long is attributed to several factors, including his meticulous planning and the use of remote locations to dispose of the bodies. The Gilgo Beach area, with its dense vegetation and isolated stretches of coastline, provided an ideal dumping ground for a serial killer who knew how to cover his tracks. Throughout this period, Heuermann continued to live an outwardly normal life, maintaining his career, family, and social connections. His activities were carefully compartmentalized, with few, if any, outward signs of the double life he was leading. This ability to separate his criminal actions from his everyday life is a hallmark of many serial offenders and speaks to the level of control and premeditation involved in his crimes. Rex Heuermann's arrest came after a lengthy and complex investigation that involved multiple law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, local police, and forensic experts. The breakthrough came when the cumulative evidence against him reached a tipping point, allowing authorities to obtain a warrant for his arrest. In the days leading up to his arrest, investigators had been closely monitoring Heuermann, gathering additional evidence to ensure a solid case. On the day of the arrest, a carefully coordinated operation was launched to apprehend Heuermann without incident. He was taken into custody at his office in Manhattan, surprising his colleagues and clients, who had no inkling of his dark double life. The arrest of Rex Heuermann sent shockwaves through the community and the nation at large. The Gilgo Beach murders had long been a source of fear and speculation, with countless theories and suspects being proposed over the years. The revelation that a seemingly ordinary man, a respected architect no less, was allegedly responsible for such horrific crimes was met with disbelief and horror. The media descended on the story, with round-the-clock coverage of Heuermann's arrest and the details of the investigation. His home in Massapequa Park became a focal point, with reporters and cameras stationed outside, eager for any glimpse of the man who had eluded capture for so long. Public reaction was equally intense, with residents of Long Island expressing both relief and outrage. The relief came from the belief that the Long Island serial killer had finally been caught, bringing an end to years of fear and uncertainty. The outrage stemmed from the fact that Heuermann had been living among them all this time, hiding in plain sight, while the community had been terrorized by his actions. As of now, Rex Heuermann remains in custody, facing multiple charges related to the Gilgo Beach murders. The case against him is being carefully built, with prosecutors working to ensure that the evidence is airtight and that justice is served for the victims and their families. The investigation into Heuermann's activities is ongoing, with authorities continuing to search for additional evidence and potential victims. Given the length of time over which the murders occurred, there is concern that there may be other as yet undiscovered victims, both in Long Island and possibly in other locations. For the families of the victims, the arrest of Rex Heuermann represents a significant step toward closure, though the pain of their loss remains. The legal process will likely be lengthy, with many twists and turns, but the hope is that justice will ultimately be served. The arrest of Rex Heuermann also raises broader questions about how such a dangerous individual was able to operate undetected for so long. It has prompted renewed discussions about the resources and methods used in investigating serial crimes, as well as the importance of not overlooking cases involving marginalized victims, such as sex workers. In the end, the story of Rex Heuermann and the Gilgo Beach murders serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most ordinary-seeming lives. As the legal proceedings move forward, the world will be watching closely, eager for answers to the many questions that still remain about this complex and disturbing case. The Gilgo Beach murders, often referred to as one of the most harrowing and enigmatic cases in the annals of American crime, have not only captivated the public's imagination, but have also left a profound and lasting impact on the communities involved and the families of the victims. Over the course of this episode, we have delved deeply into the intricate details of the case, examining the lives of the victims, the methods of the killer, the failures and breakthroughs in the investigation, and the profound social and psychological effects on those left behind. We began by tracing the timeline of the case, starting with the tragic disappearance of Shannan Gilbert and the subsequent discovery of the remains of the Gilgo Four along Ocean Parkway in December 2010. These discoveries marked the beginning of an investigation that would span over a decade, uncovering additional victims and exposing the chilling possibility that multiple killers may have been at work along the Long Island shoreline. We explored the backgrounds of the Gilgo Four, Maureen Brainard-Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello, each of whom was a vulnerable young woman navigating the precarious world of sex work. Their stories are a stark reminder of the dangers faced by those who are marginalized and often overlooked by society. The killer, or killers, preyed upon these women, exploiting their vulnerabilities and leaving their bodies to be found in the desolate stretch of land between Gilgo Beach and Oak Beach. As we delved further into the investigation, we discussed the discovery of additional remains, including the unidentified victims known as Peaches and Baby Doe, as well as the Asian male and the possible first victim, Sandra Castile. These discoveries complicated the case, raising questions about whether these murders were the work of a single individual or multiple killers operating independently or in concert. The presence of dismembered bodies and remains found in different locations suggested a level of brutality and planning that only added to the horror of the crimes. Central to our discussion was the figure of Rex Heuermann, a suspect who has come under intense scrutiny in recent years. Heuermann, a man with no prior criminal record, was thrust into the spotlight due to circumstantial evidence that links him to the area and to some of the victims. We examined who Heuermann is, his background, and the details that have emerged about his life that make him a person of interest in this case. The possibility that Heuermann could be connected to these crimes underscores the complexity of the investigation and the need for continued vigilance and scrutiny by law enforcement. As we reflect on the Gilgo Beach murders, it is crucial to recognize that the case remains unsolved, and justice for the victims is still elusive. The families of the victims continue to live with the pain and uncertainty of not knowing who took their loved ones from them, and the communities of Oak Beach and Gilgo Beach remain haunted by the specter of these horrific crimes. The investigation into the Gilgo Beach murders has been marred by missteps, delays, and missed opportunities. Early on, the focus on Shannan Gilbert's disappearance as a potential accident diverted attention from the broader pattern of killings. The slow pace of the investigation and the initial reluctance of authorities to fully engage with the possibility of a serial killer allowed the perpetrator or perpetrators to evade capture for years. These failures have had a profound impact on the families of the victims, who have had to become their own advocates, pushing for answers and accountability. However, recent developments in the case, including renewed interest in suspects like Rex Heuermann and advances in forensic technology, offer hope that justice may still be within reach. The ongoing efforts of law enforcement, coupled with the vigilance of the public and the media, are critical in ensuring that the investigation continues to move forward. It is imperative that all potential leads are thoroughly explored and that the case remains a priority for those tasked with solving it. The Gilgo Beach murders also highlight the broader issues of how society treats vulnerable individuals, particularly those involved in sex work. The stigma and marginalization that these women faced in life contributed to the initial lack of urgency in the investigation of their deaths. Their stories remind us of the importance of ensuring that all victims, regardless of their background or circumstances, receive the attention and justice they deserve. As we conclude this episode, it is important to acknowledge the tireless efforts of those who have worked to bring the Gilgo Beach murders to light and to seek justice for the victims. Law enforcement agencies, despite the challenges and setbacks, have continued to pursue the case, and the advancements in forensic science offer new avenues for investigation. The media has played a crucial role in keeping the public informed and in maintaining pressure on authorities to solve the case. The families of the victims, through their unwavering determination, have ensured that their loved ones are not forgotten. We must also recognize the role of the community in this ongoing effort. The residents of Oak Beach and Gilgo Beach, though deeply affected by the events, have shown resilience in the face of tragedy. Their willingness to cooperate with the investigation and their support for the victims' families have been vital in the search for answers. For those of you listening who want to stay informed or get involved in the ongoing effort to solve the Gilgo Beach murders, there are several ways to do so. Keeping up with the latest developments in the case through trusted news sources is essential. Many true crime forums and podcasts continue to discuss and analyze the case, offering insights and updates as new information becomes available. If you have any information related to the Gilgo Beach murders or any other unsolved crimes, it is crucial to contact law enforcement. Even the smallest detail could be the key to unlocking this mystery. Law enforcement agencies often have tip lines or online portals where information can be submitted anonymously. For those who wish to support the victims' families, there are various advocacy groups and organizations dedicated to helping the families of missing and murdered individuals. These organizations often work to provide resources, support, and advocacy for families in need. In closing, the Gilgo Beach murders serve as a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most seemingly tranquil communities. But they also remind us of the strength and resilience of those who seek justice, and the importance of never giving up the fight for truth. The search for answers in this case continues, and with it, the hope that one day, justice will be served for all the victims whose lives were so tragically cut short. As we wrap up this episode, it's important to remember the relentless determination of Mari Gilbert, the mother of Shannan Gilbert. Mari Gilbert's role in the Gilgo Beach murders investigation transcends that of a grieving mother. She became an emblem of perseverance, courage, and relentless pursuit of truth in the face of systemic indifference and neglect. Her story is one of a mother's unwavering love turned into a fierce quest for justice, not only for her daughter Shannan Gilbert, but also for the other victims whose lives were tragically cut short. From the moment Shannan went missing on May 1, 2010, Mari was thrust into a world of uncertainty and despair. Unlike many families who find themselves at the mercy of law enforcement's often slow and bureaucratic processes, Mari refused to be a passive participant in the search for her daughter. She quickly realized that the Suffolk County Police Department was not treating Shannan's disappearance with the urgency it deserved. Despite Shannan's last frantic 911 call, in which she screamed that someone was trying to kill her, the authorities initially dismissed her case as a routine missing persons investigation, with some even suggesting that Shannan, a sex worker, had simply run off or drowned in the marshlands of Oak Beach. Mari knew her daughter better than anyone. She knew that Shannan would not simply vanish without a trace, and certainly not without contacting her family. Frustrated by the lack of action, Mari took it upon herself to push for answers. She became the primary force driving the investigation forward, making countless phone calls, attending every press conference, and demanding that the police take her daughter's case seriously. Her persistence was instrumental in keeping Shannan's name in the headlines and ensuring that her disappearance was not ignored. One of the most significant turning points in Mari's fight for justice came when she learned about Dr. Peter Hackett, a resident of Oak Beach who had inserted himself into the case in a bizarre and suspicious manner. Hackett had initially denied knowing anything about Shannan, but Mari discovered that he had, in fact, called her shortly after Shannan disappeared, claiming to have taken Shannan into his care. This revelation led Mari to believe that Hackett knew more about her daughter's disappearance than he was letting on, and she became convinced that he was involved in some way. Mari's suspicions about Hackett were not unfounded. As she delved deeper into his background, she uncovered a history of erratic behavior and a disturbing pattern of inserting himself into situations involving vulnerable women. Hackett's claims that he had established a halfway house for troubled women in his home further fueled Mari's concerns. Although Hackett was never charged in connection with Shannan's disappearance, Mari's relentless pursuit of the truth kept the spotlight on him and forced law enforcement to investigate him thoroughly. Beyond her focus on Hackett, Mari also played a crucial role in challenging the police's narrative that Shannan's death was an accident. When Shannan's remains were finally discovered in December 2011, near where her belongings had been found earlier that year, the Suffolk County Police Commissioner, Richard Dormer, quickly declared that her death was likely a result of drowning or exposure. This conclusion was based on the theory that Shannan had become disoriented in the marsh and succumbed to the elements, a theory that Mari never accepted. Mari's skepticism was rooted in the discrepancies she observed between the official narrative and the facts she had uncovered. She knew that Shannan had been terrified for her life during her 911 call, and she believed that her daughter's death was a direct result of foul play. Unwilling to accept the police's explanation, Mari hired a private investigator and an independent medical examiner to conduct a second autopsy. The results were inconclusive, but the private autopsy suggested the possibility of strangulation, raising further doubts about the official cause of death. Mari's determination to seek justice for Shannan did not go unnoticed. Her story resonated with many people, particularly those who had also lost loved ones under mysterious or violent circumstances. She became an advocate for families of missing and murdered women, particularly those whose cases were not given the attention they deserved by law enforcement. Mari's activism brought much-needed attention to the systemic issues that often lead to the marginalization of cases involving women who are sex workers, minorities, or come from disadvantaged backgrounds. Her fight for justice was not without personal cost. The strain of losing her daughter and the constant battle with authorities took a toll on Mari's mental and emotional health. Despite these challenges, she never wavered in her commitment to her daughter's memory. Mari's courage and tenacity inspired others to take up similar causes, and she became a beacon of hope for families who were also seeking justice for their loved ones. Tragically, Mari's life was cut short in July 2016, when she was murdered by her daughter, Sarah Gilbert, who had been struggling with severe mental illness. Sarah, in a delusional state, believed that her mother was possessed by demons and killed her in a brutal attack. Mari's death was a devastating blow to the Gilbert family and to the community of advocates who had rallied around her cause. Yet, even in death, Mari's legacy continues to shine brightly. Mari Gilbert's legacy is one of resilience, determination, and the power of a mother's love. Her tireless efforts to keep Shannan's case in the public eye have had a lasting impact on the investigation into the Gilgo Beach murders and on the broader movement to seek justice for vulnerable women. One of the most significant aspects of Mari's legacy is the awareness she brought to the plight of women involved in sex work. For far too long, these women have been marginalized, their disappearances and deaths often dismissed by law enforcement and the public. Mari's fight for justice highlighted the inherent biases and systemic failures that contribute to this neglect. By refusing to let her daughter be dismissed as just another missing prostitute, Mari forced the world to see Shannan and the other victims as human beings, daughters, sisters, and friends, deserving of dignity, respect, and justice. Mari's advocacy also underscored the importance of persistence and the need for families to become their own advocates when seeking justice. Her story serves as a powerful reminder that the pursuit of truth is often a long and difficult journey, one that requires courage, resilience, and a willingness to confront powerful institutions. Mari's example has inspired countless others to continue fighting for their loved ones, even in the face of overwhelming odds. In the years since Mari's death, the fight for justice for the Gilgo Beach victims has continued. Advocacy groups and community organizations have taken up the cause, pushing for more resources, better training for law enforcement, and greater accountability in the investigation of crimes against women. These efforts have led to increased awareness of the challenges faced by marginalized communities and have sparked important conversations about how society treats its most vulnerable members. Mari's legacy is also reflected in the ongoing work of her surviving daughters, Sherry and Stevie, who have continued to advocate for justice for Shannan and for other victims of unsolved crimes. They have worked to keep their mother's memory alive, ensuring that her contributions to the case are not forgotten and that her story continues to inspire others. The impact of Mari Gilbert's fight for justice extends beyond the Gilgo Beach case. Her story has become a symbol of the broader struggle for the rights and dignity of all women, particularly those who are often overlooked or marginalized by society. Her legacy serves as a call to action for all of us to stand up against injustice, to demand accountability, and to ensure that every victim receives the attention and respect they deserve. As we reflect on Mari Gilbert's life and the legacy she leaves behind, it is clear that her contributions to the search for justice have had a profound and lasting impact. She was a mother who refused to give up, even when the odds were stacked against her. Through her courage and determination, Mari not only fought for her daughter's memory, but also paved the way for future generations to continue the fight for justice and equality. Her legacy will continue to inspire and guide those who seek to make the world a safer and more just place for all. If you've made it this far, drop a comment saying done, and we'll personally thank you for your incredible support. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the case of the Long Island serial killer, the untold story behind Gilgo Beach. We hope you found this episode as captivating and thought-provoking as we did while creating it. If you enjoyed the content, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. We're eager to hear your thoughts. What's your take on this case? Do you believe justice was served? Share your opinions in the comments below. We're excited to read your perspectives. In our research for this episode, we explored Lost Girls, an unsolved American mystery by Robert Kolker. If you're looking to delve even deeper into this haunting case, we've included an Amazon affiliate link in the description. It won't cost you anything extra, but purchasing through that link helps support our channel. If you're craving more content, consider joining our Patreon community. There you'll find extensive news coverage spanning over 2 decades, and you can even purchase the entire collection of images featured in this episode through our Patreon store. This has been 22 Crime. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay safe.